The Gem Story. The story of the Japan Evangelical Mission. A story that starts with tragedy, but ends with triumph. Starts with darkness and desolation, but ends with the messengers of light and life. Of Shintoism's 800 million gods, her gods of war, seen here in paper replica, were considered the most powerful. These were credited with Japan's war successes and counted upon to bring all nations under the Japanese roof. But the Shinto Torii became the doorway to Japan's destruction. In Hiroshima, the atomic bomb exploded 1,600 feet above this industrial arts building in the heart of the city. It eventually sent 140,000 persons to their grave, precipitating the end of the war and Japan's funeral. A Japanese student put it this way: as I see the desolation of my city and realize that 48 of the major cities of Japan are in ruins, I think it but a feeble example of the desolation of heart and mind which we students face. Another Japanese said, in 1945, old Japan disappeared, and unless you Christians bring us the message of the resurrection, there is no hope for us. General MacArthur, here leaving his building the supreme command of the Allied powers, knew the answer and proclaimed it. Japan must have God's message of salvation and the message of resurrection. He begged for 1,000 missionaries immediately, and when the first ones arrived, he told them, "Preach the Bible. Preach it everywhere. I have confidence in that book, for it has never failed." Similarly, he told the Japanese, "You cannot have democracy without Christianity." Miss Frances and Mrs. Devendorf, two of Japan's best known and beloved missionaries, returned to America from Japanese internment to tell of the greatest door of opportunity the church ever had. Then in 1948, a faculty member of the Prairie Bible Institute returned from a summer of conference ministry in the Orient. He was deeply concerned over the unprecedented opportunity to proclaim Jesus Christ to Japan, and of the desperately few who were doing so. This little group of God-appointed pioneers caught the vision, and with it, a special burden to train Japanese nationals to evangelize their own race. They headed west from the Canadian prairies the spring of 1949. This was the beginning of the ministry soon to be known as the Japan Evangelical Mission. In Seattle, they had to crate a house trailer and a ton of food as required by General MacArthur before they could board their freighter and sail out through the beautiful Puget Sound for Japan. They found things extremely drab, the streets empty, a people still clawing their way out from under the debris of war to start life all over again. But they also found themselves enthusiastically received. Even the store signs were often in English, sometimes with amazing results. One read, "We gather your baggage and scatter it in all directions." And another, "Men get measured here, ladies have your fits upstairs." Though physical poverty and hunger were everywhere, they found a far greater hunger, a spiritual hunger, that brought the Japanese to the street meetings sometimes by the thousands. Here Pastor Akichika from Seattle preaches to throngs in front of the Shinjuku Railroad Station. As the invitation is given, many are willing to lose face by stepping forward and kneeling right in the street in their great desire to experience that of which they had heard. After these had been dealt with, another street meeting would be held, repeating the process. The tragedy, though, was that there were so very few to follow up the decisions and help conserve the results. About 100 miles inland from Tokyo, at the foot of Mount Asama, one of Japan's most active volcanoes, is the city of Karuizawa. There the missionaries were able to obtain property with money donated from the sale of a Bible school in Tacoma, Washington, which folded up after the war. They moved into the old Japanese hotel. There they concentrated in language study and at the same time continued the fruitful work of evangelism. Their language teacher, General Yamazaki, was one of the first to take his stand for the Lord. He said, "In the last war, the Devil's War, I stayed way behind the lines. But in this war, I want to be right out in front for God." They were used of the Lord to help establish Karuizawa as the Evangelical Conference Center of Japan, which it is to this day. In 1950, a missionary team set out to find that neglected part of Japan where the Lord would have the mission concentrate its efforts. Karuizawa is marked with an X on the map. They traveled across the Japan Alps to the rugged and beautiful coastline of the Japan Sea. They held street meetings in the cities as they traveled up the coast. It was obvious that both the message and messengers were new and novel. In each place they asked concerning land for sale. Always there was the same reply: "We haven't enough for ourselves." In Kashiwazaki, however, the eager response to the message greatly impressed the missionaries. And when they asked concerning land for a Bible school, they were told by the town fathers, "Give us a week to locate some." They left New Testaments with them, and when the missionaries returned, they discovered that the city officials had met every night that week to study those New Testaments. Together they went to a suburb along the coast, and then to the end of a small valley. There the Japanese tied a piece of colored twine to a tree, placed the rest of it in the hands of an amazed missionary, and told him to mark off the land he wanted to buy. So they went across the rice paddies, up the terraced hillside, around the crest of the hill and back, taking in over 4 acres, which they purchased for a fraction of its worth. Then the Japanese said, "If you wish, we will incorporate the area into the city so that we can legally help finance the building of the road to it." As construction commenced, the missionaries were often asked their purpose in coming, which gave them a wonderful opportunity to witness. 6 months later, when the building was finished and the missionaries moved in, an entire edition of the city paper featured pictures, welcome speeches from city officials, and articles from the missionaries. The mayor, contractor, officials, and missionaries are seen here at the dedication. But one doesn't start with a Bible school. First, there must be converts. So that summer of 1951, the missionaries headed for the large open area in front of the railroad station, for a street meeting, then to the town hall for a campaign. Just mats on the floor to sit on, which conserves a lot of space. Can you see the group that remained and went forward after the others had left? The missionaries were not fluent in the language, far from it, but God's Spirit was there in power, and some of our present Christian stalwarts found Christ then. Dr. Kojima and family. The older daughter became a nurse, attended Bible school, and has been one of our Bible women. Mr. Fusei was a soldier returned to Japan from Manchuria only after becoming an ardent communist, of course. He became a disillusioned and embittered antagonist to righteousness and to society. He was contemplating suicide when converted at that first campaign, and since has served for years as an elder of the church. A short time later, a number gathered at the edge of the Japan Sea to follow the Lord into the waters of baptism. Then they commemorated the Lord's Supper. A church was born. By fall, a number of young people wanted to attend Bible school. The opening date was set. Then the missionaries began looking frantically for housing for the men students. To their surprise and joy, they discovered at the other end of the valley a large house that an old man was willing to sell. General Yamazaki was appointed to make the Oriental negotiations. These wore on and on almost until school opening. At last the missionaries were told the old gentleman wanted only $1,600 cash. But he had to have final word the very next day. The missionaries met together. There was no money. Even if they sold everything they could temporarily do without, they would not have nearly that much. They promised to spend as much time in prayer as possible and meet together the next morning. The home side knew nothing of what was transpiring, but somebody obeyed God's voice and sent $1,600. It arrived in Japan that night, and so the next day the contract could be signed. The boys had their quarters along with a faculty family. In time, a boys' dormitory was built on campus, and then a lovely chapel, grade school for missionary children, field office, and other buildings. But that is getting ahead of our story. This group gathered for the school's opening. The first students enrolled. The first faculty members, Morris Jacobson, top center, learned the Japanese language very quickly. It was he in the early years who spearheaded the work of evangelism. With his co-worker, he heads for the inland city of Ojia, back and forth, hours of it. They wondered why they were the only ones on this new grade until they came to a bridge that hadn't been built yet. Eventually, with the loudspeaker on the hood, he preaches to the crowd that gathered in front of the railway station and announces the evangelistic campaign. A famous old mansion was made available for the meetings. These decided for Christ at that time. Not many have paid the price of following on. Nevertheless, 4 Christian workers have come from the Ojia church, started at that time. The children's meeting during the campaign is in the afternoon. It was no trouble to get children or response in those beginning days. This J.E.M. kindergarten ministry has given birth to one of our strongest churches. For youth, a main attraction is the English language. Personally introduced to Jesus Christ through English Bible classes than through any other means. It is often at Bible camp, however, where they take a definite stand to make Him their Lord. Camps are featured for many different groups, including 1. just for Japanese teachers of English. Then when the winter's snow piles higher and higher, and sometimes it reaches 15 feet on the level in our part of Japan. How glad we are that we can broadcast the gospel over Japan's commercial radio stations. Since 1956, we have aired either a weekly or a daily program over a network of 3 stations, reaching a potential listening audience of over 3.5 million. Christian telecasts and gospel films are effectively utilized also as funds make them available. And GEM is a sponsor of the Pacific Broadcasting Association, which serves most of the evangelical missions and denominations in Japan as their radio and TV arm. Hospital patients and invalids are especially responsive to the broadcasts. As a result, church groups like this one in a TB SAN have begun. In a nation that excels in mass communication, literature also is a vital tool of evangelism. The Christian bookstore ministry has increased considerably since this early beginning. Sometimes it takes to the sidewalk in Oriental fashion. More than once, GEM has taken literature to virtually every home throughout our entire section of Japan. One of our most thrilling projects was to place God's Word in children's language and story form in every grade and junior high school in our area. That's more than 2,000 of these beautiful pictorial 5-volume sets. An equally thrilling project, which was subsequently launched, is that of placing the excellent new vernacular translation of the Bible in each of the high school, college, and public libraries. What about that original burden of training nationals to evangelize? It has not been lost. But like other vital ministries, it has been at times severely challenged. In 1969, the original Bible school building, enlarged to include classrooms, library, dining facilities, girls' dorm, and offices, was suddenly destroyed by fire. It was a terrible blow, caused some to wonder if we should continue the Bible school ministry. After waiting on God, the missionary body met with the unanimous decision to rise and build. Then they gave a faith promise offering of over $6,000, which by the time it all came in a year later, they had doubled. What praise and rejoicing when the new building could be dedicated. Yet, far greater cause for rejoicing are the living temples of God's grace, such as the Bible school graduates who take their place of spiritual leadership, the 15 or more congregations that have been established along with their outstations, the nationals who have replaced the missionaries as pastors in most of these churches, the officials of the National Church Organization, seen here at a business session, and for Sugiyama, who left for Paraguay, GEM's first Bible school graduate to become a foreign missionary. The GEM story is really a story of individuals willing to be used of God. But they are not all in Japan. No, indeed. They are the home missionaries, equally as dedicated to the task. In addition to their other ministries, they built this first headquarters building with their own hands, even the window and door sash, to conserve missionary dollars. They are the office staff and the board members. They are GEM's farm personnel. Located as we are in a farming area of Canada, the Lord led to establish our own feedlot to help Christian farmers to have a practical and systematic part in missions. In the first 6 years of its existence, it not only built itself to a sizable operation, but also sent $20,000 to Japan for evangelism. Farmers have been a part of the GEM story. Others have personal projects to support missions. Most of all, The gem story is of those willing to be used of the Lord in prayer. Should this be your picture? What part should you have in completing the gem story?